Just noticing how each breath, each sound, each sensation in the body arises, has its being, and passes away. The same is true of thoughts and feelings. Where do they come from? They too arise, have their being, and pass away. And following the out breath all the way to the end, where the breath sort of dissolves into space and stillness. And then feeling the expansion of the in-breath and that pause, that slight pause at the end of the in-breath. That pause of stillness and silence as it merges with the next breath out. Breathing into the vast inner world. Breathing out into the vast world outside. And in that silence, that little stillness of pause between the breaths, sensing the connection, the oneness between inside and outside. And as you breathe in, just feeling the expansion, the physical expansion of the lungs and rib cage. And then allowing the mind to expand into the space in which everything is happening, all the arising and passing away happening in this great space of awareness. And with each out breath, releasing, letting everything be, relaxing, allowing. loosening the grip of wanting to control experience, relaxing into just how it is right now. So, for those of you who might have arrived after I introduced her, I just want to once again say that I'm overjoyed to be teaching with my dear Dharma sister, Catherine Shaddix, uh, who has practiced with me for many, many years in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is a teacher in her own right now. And I'm going to offer some teachings and then make room for Catherine, which will be a great treat for you, I promise. That's all right, no pressure, Catherine. So, as I said, we're talking about this teaching of anatta, or no self, which can be really um, confusing and mysterious, and what does that mean, until you have some experience of it in your own meditation or in your own life. And you actually all have. You may not have noticed it, but you have had this experience. There are times when you're simply observing what's happening and kind of in the flow or in the zone of not feeling separate from what's happening, just very aware of it. And, this is an experience of freedom from what my first teacher called the I, me, mine. He always used to talk about the I, me, mine. And, when I first started practicing, I knew what he meant intellectually because he would explain it. But in terms of my own experience, it felt impossible not to be I, me, and have things be, and experiences be, and emotions be mine. So the Buddha, the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, actually gave very clear instructions on how to free the heart from being caught in this sort of encapsulated thought world of I, me, mine. And he said, this is what will bring an end to suffering. And he worked hard in his practice. He stayed with it until he finally came to see how our various kinds of dis-ease, insecurity, suffering, that all of it really has to do with our deep, profound, and inevitable attachment to our sense of self. And he's talking about that small self that is that refers everything to itself. If I'm here speaking to you, my small self is wondering, oh, how's it going? And are you all here? Are you listening? Are you liking what I'm saying? I mean, there's all these thoughts that are constantly accompanying whatever we're doing. Like, like that tea, I've talked about constant comment, it just is a constant trail. It's like the wake behind our experience or with our experience. And it's a loneliness to be all inside our thoughts. It's a loneliness to identify with all our beliefs about life from the position of this separate, inevitably incomplete, and sort of rigid, fixed sense of self. And so the Buddha addressed this isolation and addressed this brokenheartedness that comes from all the emotional reactivity that comes from attachment to I, me, mine, right? It's a fierce attachment. If you say something that insults me, the self just, boom, there it is. That hurt my feelings. I don't like you. All this emotional, just knee-jerk reactivity. And yet, when we can stay with the experience, whether it's the breath, the sensations in the body, the sounds of life around us, when we can stay with the direct experience, observing our perceptions and thoughts and feelings as they flow through the mind stream, when we can stay with that direct experience, it's a kind of pure, vivid experience. And the preoccupation with the self, with I, me, mine, my, how am I, how was I, how will I be, it falls away, at least for a little while. And as it falls away, what takes its place? What lies on the other side of that particular small-minded suffering is a great freedom and a great relief and lots of joy, actually. lots of joy. So we kind of it's called it's called in Buddhist practice entering the stream of life instead of feeling completely set apart from it. And it's tricky because when we talk about mindfulness and observing the mind, there is a sense of dualistic separation. Like I'm sitting on the banks of my mind stream, watching all the thoughts and feelings flow by. But with that observation comes a kind of freedom not to have to identify with each thing, each boat that floats down the stream, and 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 the promise of the practice is the end of suffering. And it's been quite a koan for me because I've been practicing like practically my whole adult life, and sure, I still suffer. So what does that mean about my practice, right? But then you begin to understand, or I began to understand, that it's not end of suffering that never changes, like some static state of freedom from suffering, or some state of freedom where I'm always going to feel free and light and expanded. And it's actually finding that sense of steadiness, of equilibrium, of freedom within the changes, within both the expansion and that contraction into the small self that happens inevitably. And this is the experience of life itself. And we develop the capacity, very, very welcome capacity, to experience thoughts and sensations and feelings fully and not to struggle with what we're experiencing. And that's the end of that kind of suffering. It's not that there's never any pain. It's not, the Buddha had headaches and backaches, but we aren't wondering, why is this happening to me? This kind of layer of struggle on top of it. And for yourself, when you're absorbed in an activity, you don't have a sense of self. You're not thinking about yourself. You naturally are, by definition, absorbed in that activity. And that's our practice, really. The point of practice is to engage and experience our lives so fully and so completely that there isn't really anything left over. We can sometimes call it empty, open, aware, but it's quite natural that happens, and that then we're free to care about others and their sufferings and struggles. And I wanted to share with you, I found, I was going through some old files and papers, trying always that sort of ongoing effort to declutter that never ends, kind of like our practice. And I found this is like from a neuroscientist who wrote about the brain, a meditator actually. He wrote an article in 2005. Okay, so this is almost 20 years ago, and he quotes a philosopher named Thomas Nagel and says, "The ordinary simple idea of a single person will come to seem quaint someday when the complexities of the human control system, our thinking, right, become clearer, and we become less certain that there is anything very important that we are just one of." And I've talked with you here about internal family systems. Dick Schwartz's way of understanding the mind is made up of parts, and told you the story of my friend Spencer years ago, who was trying to stop smoking, and I hadn't seen him for a while, and I saw him and I'm like, "Hey Spencer, how's it going? And then, are you smoking?" And he said, "Well," he said, "one of us has stopped, but some of us do have a cigarette from time to time." And that sense of there being a kind of committee inside, right? This is a quote from Wes Nisker, quoting Time magazine. He says, in the summer of 1995, Time magazine summarized the latest brain research in a cover story entitled In Search of the Mind. And these are old things because I'm finding old papers, yes, but also because it's just good to know this is not a new realization. And the Buddha had it many, many, many years before the 20th century, before Time magazine. Most people were probably not aware that the mind was lost, and the chances are they became quite disturbed to discover that even the neuroscientists couldn't find it. The Time article concluded, despite our every instinct to the contrary, consciousness is not some entity inside the brain that corresponds to self, some kernel of I, me, my that runs the show. After more than a century of looking for it, brain researchers have concluded that such a self simply does not exist. So these are scientists, neuroscientists, not mystics, who are claiming that the self, as we conceive of it, does not exist. That small-minded, preoccupied self. Hard to believe, isn't it, when you're caught in the grip of it? But these days we use science to, I would say, support the perceptions that come from your own spiritual experience when you're sitting and just being present, your heart open, in a moment of stillness. And it's a little bit contrived to focus on that pause or that stillness between the breaths, but it's a really good practice for developing an appreciation for the stillness and meditation, even when the mind is quite busy and active. And in those moments of being able to observe and of suffusing that observation with some loving kindness and some tenderness that we talk about here often, in these moments, you're free. I'm free. We are free from being preoccupied with ourselves. And isn't it a relief? Even when I say that to you, my body breathes a deep sigh of relief. So this is what I want to share with you, some of it this morning, and I want to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Trudy. Am I audible to everybody? Yeah, good. Okay, great. I have this kind of strange thing on my computer camera that makes me look like I'm sitting kind of in a room with Venetian blinds. I don't know if anyone sees that or if it's just on my screen, but just want to name that because it could be confusing if you're seeing that. I can't seem to get rid of it. So one thread in the beautiful words you just offered, Trudy, I wanted to pick up and maybe certainly add another, perspective or way of, I think, maybe working with or embracing or even cherishing this aspect of our own experience when we're not clear, when we don't feel expanded, when we do feel all tangled up in the experience of I, me, and mine, and how certainly I still struggle with conceiving of that experience as the part of the practice that's as valuable or as valid as the expanded, spacious feeling of ease and freedom, which is just a mind state, right? Those moments of freedom and ease, they're very precious and they lead us in the direction of greater and greater freedom. But it's very easy for me to get attached to one side of the equation, right? The open side. And then when there's the feeling of contraction or, just mind folding in on itself with preoccupation and worry and projection and future thinking and past rumination, that the interesting thing for me has to become able to be with those experiences of contraction with no identification, right? That's really tricky because they're inherently sticky those experiences and tend to make us feel in a very embodied way, like, oh, this is all my experience. And so the being able to, however we can, make just a little bit of space inside of that experience by like opening the hand of thought any way that's possible, even just noticing that that's where we are and naming it, being able to say, oh, right now, this is being in the brambles, or this is, I sometimes will even talk to myself like one part to another and just say, honey, you're doing it again. You're all tangled up again. And that's okay. You don't have to feel the urge to untangle or to be any other way than it actually is right now. But just to notice that this is what's happening, give a little bit of um, space and almost like shining a light on it so that then that experience frees itself. Basically, I don't actually, whatever the I is in that moment, doesn't have to do the work of untangling. It actually untangles and frees itself when there's just a little bit of space or just a little bit of decoupling from that experience, or just even noticing, which is inherently letting go of it. And so I wanted to just bring that forward because I think I used to suffer actually under this idea that I was only experiencing no self in these moments of expansion and ease. And that was the only place they were available. So I just wanted to kind of bring that forward as maybe a something we could, I don't know, maybe discuss together, you and me, Trudy, and then see where we go with that.
Thank you for bringing that forward. That's so important, Catherine, and I appreciate it because those expanded moments, they're really just a chance for you to get a taste of what it feels like to be free from that self preoccupation, to let all that just fall away. And I say let it fall away because you can't make it fall away. And if you try to make it fall away, so you can get, it doesn't happen. So in fact, Suzuki Roshi, who wrote that wonderful book I've mentioned to you so many times, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, he said, if you're sitting, meditating rather, if you're meditating and trying to get enlightened, you're wasting your time on your cushion or your chair or your floor or your bed or your couch, wherever you are. And that teaching is really pointing to what Catherine's talking about, that we're if we're only aiming toward one side of experience. And a teacher that Catherine studied with for many years, but that I did a little bit of practice with, talked about the being born side of life, the joyful, the expanded, the, fresh experience of being free from the self, or we could think of it in terms of springtime or just the things that we celebrate, and the dying side of life when we get very contracted and it feels like the bad kind of emptiness, loneliness and maybe self-hate and the bad the empty of goodness feeling of emptiness. And that to be able to be present with those experiences is part of what Catherine's talking about, to see that, just seeing this is how it is to be a human being. This is the dying side of life. At some point, we're all headed there, whether momentarily or because of a breakup that feels like we're dying, or because of a diagnosis or an illness, or the time of our actual coming to the end of our life. So I really am grateful that you brought that forward, Catherine, because it's the trickiest thing to do, but otherwise the practice is lopsided.
So I Trudy, thank you. That was a lovely thing to tie in the teachings from Sasaki Roshi there. So I wanted to say something sort of along the same lines that I think is a manifestation of this no self teaching. It comes out of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, where, of course, this no self idea is, permeates that entire lineage through the teachings on emptiness, which is, I think, just another kind of way to describe this coming into being and going out of being that we don't have control over, and that leans on everything else, right? Like there's nothing that exists separately. That's basically when you think about the no self teachings. Really, if you're going to boil it down, it's just basically saying everything arises in dependence on something else, right? It's like there's nothing that exists independently. Not that these experiences that we have moment to moment don't have validity or aren't relevant or should be cast away. It's actually the opposite. Like because everything leans on everything else, you're embedded in this intensely relational process from the beginning of your life until the end of your life. From the beginning of your hour, desire to wake up until the very end of that path, it's intensely relational. And so, like any relationship, there are moments when we are overjoyed to be in relationship with whatever it is, right? And there are moments that are really difficult when we would, if we had the means, give anything to remove ourselves from that difficult moment or painful interaction. But the beauty is being able to say yes to all of it and to recognize that the way that each moment constructs itself and that we come into being is through this intensely relational process that holds us and creates us, and ultimately will be, the we will pass out of this experience that we are familiar with in our present life. We'll pass out of that into, I really believe, some other form of relationship. So that's another kind of frame we can put on this no self teaching, that not only does it, I found it initially when I was, studying this kind of concept of the relational practice that's kind of, you can't get out of it, basically, that this is what we're, engaging in by being human. Initially, I found that very um, kind of terrifying, actually, to be honest. But then as I thought about it and tried to live into it, I was like, this is actually the most beautiful possible thing that could arise, that we would be embedded in this thing, this process, this um, actualization that is so much bigger than any one of us, sort of to speak to that article, that we are not just one small component. We're actually, a a node in this vast web of awareness and individual consciousness, but that's embedded in this much bigger field of awareness that's shared. So I think that I'm going to just maybe pass that back to you, Trudy, and see where you might like to go with that.
Well, I was just looking. I was looking at the chat, um, and I see a question from Charles who says, "What is the difference between a healthy detachment from the I, me, self state of mind that you're talking about and an unhealthy detachment or dissociation from reality? Like, how do you tell the difference?" Um, and then Rory said, "Can we give an everyday example of the no self?" Well, I just will answer. I guess we've started our questions and answers with
Mhm.
everybody, which is great. Um, I would answer to you, Charles, that um, unhealthy detachment or dissociation from reality, i.e., psychosis, is if you've ever been with a person who is experiencing a psychotic, what we call a psychotic break, there's really no difficulty in telling the difference, because a person who is psychotic um, is really disconnected from the reality, the consensual reality that we share, and getting ideas and messages and experiences that are just really different, and that we would, you know, in our ordinary mind label crazy, because they are disconnected from reality. And I think that all of these states of mind and heart are a continuum, right? And we've all gone crazy at different points, but our crazy parts are not generally in charge of us most of the time. Whereas somebody who is completely dissociated from reality doesn't have that choice. Um, they're not going back and forth from states of connection or disconnection, things like that. Um, and so, an everyday example. Rory, do you mean an everyday example of no self? I'll give you an everyday example, but I'm not sure if this is what you mean. You'll have to tell me. I was reading a book called Jewels by Ken, I forget his last name. Anyway, it's a Dharma book for young people, and a wonderful book actually. And he was talking about how when he grew up, his family didn't have the money to. His parents were working really hard, and they didn't. He lived in a working class neighborhood. He's Japanese American, and he said they just didn't have the money to take the kids on holidays and big, camping trips and things like that. But that there were some people. He joined the Boy Scouts, and there were some people from the wealthier neighborhoods who donated their time to take kids on camping trips. And those are some of his just most wonderful memories of his childhood, is getting to go on these camping trips. And then he was talking about the selflessness of people who would give of themselves to these kids, not their families, not their I, me, mine circle. That's an everyday example of selflessness. If that, I don't know if that's what you mean.
I meant like the I and the me, like Catherine was talking about. You can't get rid of it, but like when that comes up, and not only in those little moments, because I know what you mean by that, but I don't want to say how to make it come up in other moments, because like you said, you can't make it come up. But I was more interested in like the I and the me, like how to negotiate that.
That's a great question. I'm going to let Catherine speak to it, but I'll just say briefly, mindfulness is key there.
Mhm. Yeah.
Absolutely key. Do you
Yeah.
want to add, Catherine? Because that was what you were.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, thanks for that question, Rory. And I, I think that it's, the thing we always are wondering, like, how do you work with the I, me, mine to make it not be I, me, mine, right? Or how do you understand the experience that we're having at any given moment as not I, me, mine, even if we're not attached to it, right? Even if we're fairly um, spacious with whatever is arising. And I think that I'll just say that from my own experience, and this wasn't some. There were tastes of this very early on in my practice life, but it didn't become something that was available to me until quite a ways in, right? To a lot of like um, inclining my mind towards the releasing the hand of thought experience of just being able to see that I was thinking and take a step back from that. And that is actually available even when we're in the midst of something that feels very congested. There's always this potential to be able to just take a step back and say, oh, I see, I'm selfing right now. Or this, even probably better language, this is the act of selfing doing itself right here in this body and this mind. And I feel like that sounds maybe a little bit esoteric, but the actual experience of it, I think we do all the time when it's almost like kind of waking up out of our daydream. If we're thinking about like, oh, I'm going to be doing this and that and the other thing tomorrow on Monday. We don't even have to be sitting to do this, kind of just coming back to the present moment of recognizing like, oh, I'm just thinking about tomorrow. That's not actually happening right now. What's happening right now is this X, Y, and Z. I'm driving my car. I'm sitting on the floor. I'm looking at my computer screen, whatever it is that's happening. That ability to just shift sets and come back to basically it's just, you know, the foundational components of our experience, right? The aggregates, like what's happening in my body, what's happening in, I won't even say what's happening in the body, what's happening in the mind, what's happening in the environment around me, so to speak. Those are always available for us to just shift our attention to. And then there's that moment of kind of almost like falling back into space right there in the midst of our experience.
So one piece more, and I don't want to take too much time, but
Oh,
on those moments that I've had that, I've thought to myself, well, now what do I do with all that time? So I think a lot of it must be a habit, and then I forgot what my therapist, he was a Buddhist psychologist. He said, now you know what it means to, I can't remember the word he used, but it does happen when those moments happen. I think, well, now what am I going to do with all that time that I spent, ruminating and doing that? And I'll let you, I'd like to hear your answer, but my thought from what you said is, I guess I can notice that as well.
That's it. Totally. With us, if you can do it, and if you're judging, if there's a tone of judgment in there, I wasn't sure about that. But if there's like, oh my God, I just wasted all that time ruminating, or what do I do with all this open space, right? That's available if I'm not ruminating. Either direction, there's just that ability to say, oh, that's what's arising now, right? There's a question arising in the mind. This is something that I wanted to say earlier, and then I think I got a little bit sidetracked from saying, but the biggest takeaway is the wisdom, for me anyway, was the wisdom of what to do with this is always right there in the moment. That whatever, and I think this is sort of the basis of the no self teachings as I understand them, was that when we're not in relationship, in a tight, congested relationship with our small self experience, so much wisdom and compassion is available. And I would say it's always available in every moment if we can do this shifting of sets, right? Shifting our attention from something into a broader view, let's say. So Trudy, I'm going to hand that back to you.
Thank you.
Actually, we've got people asking,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I don't know who was first, maybe Michelle. I'm looking for the title of the book, so I can't see your face, but I think it's Michelle, aka Barbara Streisand.
Hi, guys. First of all, if I've learned anything from mindfulness, this is so helpful. It's to name it. Just name it. And I remember Tara Brach many years ago, what you resist persists. So if I can back away from it and name it, I can get away from that entangled self. I want to share something that happened, and I'll do it very quickly, a couple of weeks ago to me. And I think this is an example of getting entangled. I'm in an acting class that I love. I was doing a scene that I absolutely love, East Coast Jewish woman, not, really difficult for me. And all of a sudden I found myself thinking, are people liking this? How come they're not laughing? This is comedic. What's going on here? And I realized what I was doing to myself, and I caught it, and I was able to get back into the enjoyment. But would that be an example, Trudy or Catherine, that I got caught up in that entanglement of what everybody else was thinking rather than being in it and with it? Is that an example?
What do you think?
Yes, I do.
I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, when you shared that earlier, I thought, yeah, that's what happened to me. I really did get caught up in well, what are they thinking and how are they reacting and how come they're not laughing? This is comedic. And I almost lost my way, but I was able to name it and bring myself back. And that's very uncomfortable when that happens. You know, it's like, whoa, I guess that's the small self getting all entangled, if I understand it correctly.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the kind of suffering that we have like all the time that the Buddha was wanting us to be free from. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you both. This is lovely.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm really happy that you'll get to hear Catherine more next week too. Gary, you have to unmute yourself, please.
Thanks, Judy. And thank you, Catherine, as well. As I'm listening to both of you, I'm thinking about the connection between I, me, and my, and mirror neurons. And for years, I've had this thing in my brain, for whatever reason, where when I come in contact with someone who might have like a wound on their right arm, right? My brain goes nuts and like I will feel something on my right arm. And I've used, in the past several months, I've been playing with my metta practice, where when I notice me like creating this false sensation in my body, in my mind, I'll be like, whoever I'm looking at, may you be happy, may you be healthy, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm using that practice to actually create separateness and to remind myself that I'm not in that person's body, and to calm down whatever mirroring is happening in my mind. And it's funny because as I've been playing with this practice, I was like, am I being a complete narcissist by using a practice that's supposed to create interconnectedness to actually create a sense of separateness in my mind? But maybe in listening to you both today, it's actually a way of calming down the I, me, my thing. I don't think I'm talking clearly, but
Well, I think oh, go ahead, Catherine.
Could I answer?
Please.
Yes, that was very very interesting sort of offering you just made, because there was a lot in it. And I would say that what you're doing is not creating necessarily a sense of separateness. It's like you're doing, actually, I think what I was describing earlier, you're entering more into relationship, but in a way that's more skillful for yourself and the other person. That's what it sounds like to me. I mean, being able to recognize like there's a moment of intense identification, that's what it sounds like, that happens on the brain level. Like you're not doing that consciously. So I would not consider that a narcissistic thing necessarily. It's just like your brain happens to have a lot of empathic connection in it. So you feel what others feel. And that can be an incredible gift. And it's also a vulnerability, right? If it's just a little, if it's not right sized, that can, make your experience lopsided, right? Your subjective experience lopsided. So I would say using metta in that way is actually like a very wise way to create the reminder for yourself, like I am relating to this experience with love, but I'm not wanting to be so identified with this person that I can't like create what would be like a workable boundary.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's exactly what it is. Like it helps me be present. And not take on something that isn't real, really. Right.
And that, right. And that might not lead to more wisdom and compassion. If, as you're describing it, if your brain is kind of like overloaded with this inability to like locate yourself and the other. I mean, we do need to have self and other. I mean, maybe if you're Ramana Maharshi, no, he was a great Indian mystic who I think woke up entirely and then lived from that place from a very young age. And I think that's a fascinating experience to imagine what it would be like, but that's not what I experience. I need self and other, right? Otherwise I would get into tremendous trouble. So I think what you're describing is something very skillful. and working with self and other. Trudy, what do you think?
I agree. And it reminds me of my first teacher used to say, when people would have an experience of oneness and expansion and get all excited about it, he would say, "You only understand one, you do not understand two." We need both. We need both. Um, yeah, we need both, and otherwise it is a boundaryless. We're not, when we talk about maybe inside and outside becoming one or that kind of language, it's not an unhealthy fusion of losing your boundaries completely and unable to establish any and say no to people or no to things that you don't want. Do you know what I mean? Like there's really a practical level where, as Catherine said, we need ourself and we need I, me, mine, and we need to understand, I'm me and you're you. That's kind of, I think, what Charles was asking about. I don't see, are you still here, Charles? Yeah. I think that's part of what Charles was asking about earlier. Like, what's the difference of these states that are unhealthy and healthy? Or, in Buddhist terminology, wholesome or unwholesome, we would say.
Liza's had her hand up for a while.
Yeah.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. I had a question about parts. I know that I live in my child part a lot. I'm aware of it. And when I try to channel other parts, I feel like they're not coming across that way. And I guess my question is, how does that all tie into no self?
I'm going to hand that to you, Catherine, because you've been doing a lot of work with IFS.
Well, if I'm understanding your question, Liza, it's that you're aware of a part that's maybe feeling predominant. Yeah. The child part, like you feel like that comes forward and you're trying to bring other parts forward. Maybe your adult self, maybe, or different parts.
Yes.
Yeah. Of the adult
especially
self.
Adult self, especially
Yeah.
adult self.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think that your concern is that other people aren't perceiving that. Is that what the issue is? That other people aren't noticing or responding, perhaps, to what you think, an adult self would elicit, right, from other people. I mean, that's kind of it's a deep question, right? Because there is this internal experience we can have of being, in relationship to different aspects of ourselves and acting from those places, but that doesn't always get mirrored by other people, right? And that can feel quite invalidating at times, right? Or frustrating. So I would without being able to go into a whole exposition on the specific things that you're doing, I would say it might be really interesting to notice in yourself what kind of behaviors you're drawn to when these different parts are more predominant, right? How just based on your own assessment, not even getting anyone else's feedback, but what are the qualities of this aspect of yourself when you're feeling younger, more vulnerable? Those could be aspects of your child self. And what urges come out of that, and what behaviors and thoughts, and what are the ways that those parts manifest? And I would just say, from your own side, does that feel congruent within yourself when you're feeling like you're coming from a more adult part? What urges, behaviors, thoughts come with that? And does that feel like it fits together on your side? I would do a little bit of assessment. And then maybe after you've kind of established where you feel clarity and like some solidity with it, then maybe ask a really trusted person, like, when I do this, how does it feel to you? What's your experience? I would maybe do it in two parts. Like, kind of do some inner assessment and then collect some data from somebody that you trust that might be able to give you reliable feedback about it. Because it sounds like your goal is to be able to, come from this more adult self and have people respond to that in a way that feels good. Yeah.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes,
Does that plan, is that helpful? Maybe you've already been doing that. And that's like,
I think
not where you need to be guided. Let me just check in about that.
no, I definitely can explore that more. I think mainly it's because the childhood part is because I feel like there's more hope and sort of like the fantasy and fairy tale. So the world feels, I feel like if I go into adult part fully, it's much more hopeless and difficult. So I think it's kind of just hiding and smiling and kind of just being people pleaser and
got it.
Yeah.
So maybe it's okay without going into a whole discussion
sorry,
about parts, which I find fascinating. Actually, I'd be happy to do that. But the last thing I want to say is, and this could be a mindfulness practice for you, is when you notice this inclination, I think we can all use this actually, when you notice this inclination towards fantasy and like a kind of innocence, maybe our child self is usually quite innocent. I would just ask the question, what need is there? What need does this being have, this part of myself have? And how could I meet that need? That could be a really interesting mindfulness inquiry for you to like just lean into the fantasy, not in the sense of like that it is a reality that could be manifested. Usually not, but there's often a need that could be taken care of in there. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
I just want to add that I really miss childhood.
Right.
I'm blessed with the fact that I had a basically, good childhood. So I know for many people, childhood was more nightmarish, but that was not the case in my family, and I really do miss it. And I want to turn to you, Nick, to your question that you put in the chat. What is then ultimate what, capital W, I mean, or how, capital H, of this human life? Just a little question for us, Catherine.
Thanks for taking it up.
But I will say that the thing is that's tricky about this question, if you ask people like us, is that there really isn't a truth, capital T, Nick, that stands outside of experience or separate from experience, without it just being conceptual, which could be comforting and entertaining and philosophically pleasing, psychologically satisfying, but not really, not deeply, not when, like me, I'm getting more toward the end of my life. So I really, the questions assume more urgency to me, and maybe you experience that too, these questions of what is this human life? So I'm going to turn that question back to you. And from your experience, you've had plenty of life experience by now. What do you feel is the ultimate what or how of this human life for you, Nick? Just for you. There's no big capital T truth, for everybody.
That's a really good question. And, it boils down to, the words just don't do it justice, because it's an experience. And even trying to put it into words, because I'm kind of at the edge of that experience right now. And the words are just lacking, because it's like trying to eat the menu, because the menu is so detailed and so well described and how wonderful this is going to taste. And you end up eating the menu and you realize this is not satisfying. So it's kind of, because all the words end up, sounding so the same. and yet it's not. It is the actual embodied experience that when we're having it, that I feel privileged and grateful and thankful that this is available to human beings. And the rest of it is like, I don't know, who cares? I mean, I do at times I spend a lot of time ruminating, reading about all this kind of what is the ultimate purpose of the human species on planet Earth? What's the ultimate purpose of life in general in this whole universe? Why did this whole thing even ever happen? I mean, anyway, but and it's not a but, it's an and it's the experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. When you were speaking, I got tears in my eyes because it's so beautiful what you said. Really, thank you, Nick. Thank you. So I think now let's
Can I just add one more thing, Trudy, before we come to the end? I
Yeah,
also
yeah.
thought that was like a beautiful transmission there, Nick. Thank you. I would say, it's not also with this, what we're doing, there's no destination with a capital D, right? I'd say it's just all process with a capital P.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. So let's just sit together for a minute, and after that, we'll have closing, and Caroline will put people in breakout groups, small groups, where you can have a chance to share and talk about these things together after a 10-minute break. So at the end of a time of study and practice together, listening to teachings and meditating and sharing our lives, we offer our gratitude for having this kind of time and these practices and teachings, and as Nick was saying, just the blessing of all of this. We express our gratitude by sort of making this leap of imagination and sending the blessings, whatever goodness has arisen from your practice and from our time together today, we offer to all beings everywhere without exception. May we and all beings continue to grow our capacity for caring for each other, for selfless support of each other, and for our own, and growing in our own love and wisdom. May we grow in love and wisdom, which inevitably leads to this relationship and connection to the whole web of life. So thank you, everybody. And Caroline will, if you want to join a breakout group, which I strongly recommend, there'll be a 10-minute just bio break, whatever break, lunch if you're in Pacific time zone. And then Caroline will put you into breakout groups, but actually Zoom does it. So there's nothing personal about it. It's not it's just a function of the Zoom technology that you get to be in small groups and get to know each other a little bit and share with each other. So thank you, everybody, for your attention and your presence. And next week, Catherine will be here with you.
Looking forward to seeing you guys. Thank you so much, Judy, for having me.
Thank you. And everybody, feel free to unmute, say hi, goodbye.
Thanks, Trudy. Thanks,
Thank
Catherine.
you guys so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks,
you.
such a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
True.
Bye.
Hello, Carol. Okay, I'm going to put my going out shoes on.
Mm. Is everyone from the Pacific time zone?
Hi guys, thanks for sticking around. We'll take a couple minutes for a break. I know, sorry, I can't have my camera on. I'm like in a different location, so my internet's too bad for me to have my camera on, but we'll come back in a couple minutes and resume. But I'll see you guys around 12:42.
Thank you.
How you doing, Bob? You're muted.
Oh yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm doing good. I've been away a lot of weekends.
So have
I've been
I.
here in about a month, but
Ditto.
I'm here for I think 3 weeks, and then I'm gone for 5 weeks. So
No
it's
kidding.
nice to be back for a little while.
Yeah, I went to Sweden for 3 weeks, so I wasn't here either.
Oh, nice. How was that?
Oh, it was fabulous. My wife is Swedish, so we go back and see her family. She actually has a condo in her hometown of Luleå, Lulea, 500 miles north of Stockholm.
Oh,
So
nice.
very nice. Very. People don't know that Sweden is bigger than Germany geographically,
Yeah, yeah.
and the 25% north part of Sweden, where she's from, has 3% of the population. So it's great outdoors and really beautiful.
Yeah, my wife and I have been talking about wanting to go to Sweden sometime in the next, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. So I'd like to see it.
Go for it. It's
And Denmark, and you can just go across the bridge, right?
yeah, from southern Sweden, from Malmo, you can drive across. But
Right.
you know, Sweden is like sort of traversing California north to south. So
Oh, really? Wow.
yeah. But it's
Hi guys,
beautiful.
thanks for, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No problem.
Thanks for hopping on, everyone. If you're around, feel free to join back. Someone, I think Jacknet, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but she's joining us here. I was thinking we might just do one discussion, depending if she can join or not. But I thought the discussion today, Catherine and Trudy did a really great job.
So we're not going to go into
Hi,
breakout
Sherry.
rooms.
Hi, Candace.
Hi. Sorry, I'm having trouble with the connection. Please try.
Sorry about that.
Uh-huh.
I don't think so,
Okay.
because I can't, actually, I can't get them set up.
It's okay. It's okay. Don't worry.
I'm sorry.
Not a problem.
Hi, Sherry. Hi, Candace.
Hello, friends.
Yeah, I've missed you guys.
Yeah, we've missed you. I've missed you.
Yeah, I've been out of town a lot on weekends.
Mhm. I'm finding myself still trying to absorb a lot of the things that we heard today. So I'm feeling more contemplative than conversational. If anyone else wants to share or.
Well, the only thing I was thinking, which was obvious from my questions, was, you know, if you're going to eliminate the self, I, me, mine, all of that, I don't know if, I know I have, I don't know if I think most people at some time have or another have had a disassociative experience where it's like an outer body experience, where you feel like you've left your body. And the question is that a psychiatric dysfunction, or is that a healthy state that you want to be in to separate yourself from yourself? And I think that those outer body experiences are sort of right on the line between the two, because it's not really, I think in my mind, the answer to my own question is that one is consensual and volitional, the other is not. And however, you can come back from an unhealthy, psychotic, disassociative state by volition, by getting help and counseling and whatever you need to do to bring yourself back and help yourself. So in a sense, it's volitional to come back, but it doesn't initiate consensually or volitionally. So I think that might be the difference, but really, sadly, people who are in a, I would say, an unstable emotional condition, who might attain the separation from self volitionally, could enter into a psychotic state. So it's basically, in my mind, a spectrum, and it just depends on where you're able to maintain or contain yourself along that spectrum. And certainly drugs are a whole different story. That is a whole different discussion, but anyway.
Well, that makes sense to me. And even drugs can be a healthy dissociation. I mean, having a beer after work, right? Or taking psychedelics or other kinds of, the question is, how do you use it? Is it working for you? Is it working against you? I think is the issue. And can you go in and out, and then do it, tend to what you need to do. The other thought I had was this, Charles, you may be old enough to remember, there was a radical psychiatrist in the 60s called R.D. Laing, and he's a Scottish guy, and he had a clinic in London, I believe it was, and they would invite people with psychoses to come and live there and be taken care of and explore their quote unquote craziness in art or music or whatever they wanted to do. It was pretty controversial, but he was saying, we're pathologizing these people's inner worlds. And he had a book, he wrote stuff called The Politics of Experience. And now who knows? I don't know if they did any outcome studies to see how many people it worked for and how many it didn't. Excuse me, but he described, a lot of individuals that came there who would, maybe spend, months just painting their inner demons and then, working through it and going back out. So, and to me, that's a mindfulness practice, right? Like, here's your experience, be with it. So those are some thoughts I had.
Well, it's true. It's very difficult to determine the distinction sometimes.
I have had probably what's kind of an out-of-body experience, but not psychotic. And it was just an intensely focused, I don't know, I did feel like I was out of my body, but it was while I was playing tennis. My focus was so very intense that it was like I don't know, my body was doing its thing and my mind was not even, you know what I mean? Automatic, sort of, instinctual, sort of. I didn't have to think about it, but I was aware that it was happening. And I think they call it being in the zone.
I call it.
I'm kind of thinking about like a peak experience too, like sometimes like a spiritual kind of moment, which I've experienced a couple of times, usually like backpacking or something. And for those, it was more like a feeling, well, maybe it's not like disconnection like you're talking about. It felt like I wasn't me, but it felt more like I was just part of everything, which is almost the opposite of disconnecting, but
yeah, you can have that same sort of feeling like doing mescaline or something like that, peyote.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Well, sometimes I think the focus can be so narrow and pointed that it excludes so much that it feels like a disassociative experience, but it's really not, because you're still got that pinpoint of connection. I don't know about, I've never done, I know Bob has done a psychedelic experience, I haven't. But I think that's more of a chemically induced state rather than a volitionally induced state, even though you're volitionally taking the drugs. So
Well,
that's why yeah.
Sorry, Charles.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, but the experience of it is your experience. You don't, you're not, the drug may induce it, but you're not, you're having real experiences.
Yeah, you are. Except the difference is that what they were discussing today is for you to create the separation from I, not a drug. So, anybody can do it by dropping acid, but not everybody can do it in a mindfulness way, So That's the difference to me. And I'm not saying one is better or worse than the other. They're just different. That's all.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be hard to imagine meditation inducing what psilocybin could do to you. I'd be interested to hear about it if somebody had done that, but kind of
Well,
hard to imagine.
I know somebody who goes actually to South America
Oh, right.
for retreats where they take plant medicine is what they call it. And
Ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca, yeah.
yes, or psilocybin too, I think. I don't know. And the intention and the it's sort of volitional in the sense that someone, I believe one would need to be intending and wanting that kind of experience in order to be vulnerable to it, I think, especially in a like a spiritual context. So I'm fascinated by it, but I'm not ready to check it out right now for myself yet. But
Well,
yeah.
you could do it just with marijuana.
So but I'm really interested in people's descriptions of the healing and the connection that they feel. So yeah.
You know, I'm thinking it's sort of curious. There's sort of an antagonism between the terms. In order to be mindful and to try to exclude the self or I, me, mine kind of thinking, you have to be able to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, independent, and self-directed to have that kind of influence over yourself. So in order to try to remove yourself from yourself for that purpose, you have to be intensively selfish. And so it's sort of a contradiction, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
I think if you think in absolute terms, but you know, in real life, it's kind of what Trudy said, you know, what you're hoping for is being able to access that kind of no self experience while you're experiencing your self experience. You know what I mean? It's like maybe there's some kind of perfect master, like Kevin mentioned, who kind of got it. Now they've got it, or you know, that woman whose name Byron Katie or somebody, you know, just seemed like they got it. Now they've got it, but that they're like extremely rare. And I think it's, for me anyway, it's like it's a lot if you just can use the experiences we have through mindfulness and Buddhist study to balance the other thing, which is how the culture works, right? You know, it sort of gives you some like little for some reason I just had the image of trying to get across a stream, and you know, just kind of raging but jumping from stone to stone, and the stones are kind of moments of mindfulness and detachment.
Yeah, and to maintain your sanity in the process.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
I didn't know the thought about when they were talking, which was they were talking about these kind of contracted states that we think of as negative or whatever, and you know, I'm that way about grief, except when I'm actually in it. Like when I'm resisting it, I feel like shit and, you know, kind of depressed. When I let go to it and I really drop into it, actually, there's some of the best experiences of my life. I feel like expanded. It's intense, but not in a bad way. I mean, especially if I'm crying, it almost feels like I mean, it feels very liberating, actually. And we think of that as kind of a negative state, maybe, but it isn't. If you're really surrendered to it, at least in my experience, it's the resistance that feels terrible.
Well, that's the whole purpose of grief. That's why nature constructed grief. If you go through the process, you're going to be relieved by it. But if you don't allow yourself to do that, then it's going to compound your problems.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what they mean when they say let yourself feel sad and like explore like that feeling and not resist it.
I'm having a little, you were
Is
kind of
that
breaking
what
up
you
there for
guys
me,
are
Carolyn. I
speaking
couldn't
to?
really
I
hear
think
you.
so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Oh, I was just saying in terms of dropping into it, is that what they mean with that, or let yourself explore those emotions and like embrace them versus like kind of the resisting that people naturally do?
Yeah.
I think it's also.
Well, I found this.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, in terms of like the dissociative experiences, I feel like I've heard of that in both a negative and positive context, because some people, you know, whether or not they're on a meditative retreat or it's within their practice, they'll kind of do their best to reach that state of separating themselves from like their I, me, mind. Versus I've actually, like in high school, there was a student who did like smoke too much weed, and then he actually dissociated from his body and like couldn't get like back into it. But it was a very, yeah, he entered into that, and so but it was a really negative experience for him because he was kind of like resisting it in a way, and like he didn't want to be like that, and it was, you know, confusing and everything. So that's just my thought of how I've heard of it in a positive and negative context, and I think it just has to do with like the intentionality that you go into it with, if that makes sense.
I mean, they
Yeah.
go ahead, Sherry. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, just because I work with people who sometimes have a first experience with what we would say is psychosis, and then they have psychosis. Like if they have a family history or that vulnerability, they might be changed for their lives, which is kind of, especially, you know, we see it with people maybe who've just graduated high school, gone off to college, party. And so I think also it's really important to be just really respectful and cautious of the power of at least the assisted with plant medicines and drug part. But anyway, that's where my head is because I see it. But
No, for sure. They say that people who have, you know, who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia should not mess around with psychedelics. I think there's a reason for that, you know.
When they're 18, they might not know that they're going to have it.
No, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, he had like a predisposition apparently, and he didn't know about it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, going through the strong emotions like grief or anxiety and depression, to me, is the entry to dealing with those problems and being able to find a long-term resolution personally with them, because the opposite is why we have so many people involved with drugs as a way of not dealing with their emotional problems, involved with, you know, sexual addiction, with workaholics, with whatever it is, gambling, all of those things are avoidance of dealing with your very strong emotions, which will never solve a problem, but will only exacerbate them. But I have found if you deal with especially anxiety or depression, if you realize that you are in large part writing your own script, and your whatever it was in your formative years, et cetera, is causing this, if you let yourself feel it and say to yourself, why am I experiencing this now? What triggered this? And then you start to realize when it starts to happen in the future, it won't necessarily stop it from trying to occur, but you will be able, if you let it happen and feel it, you can have it dissipate very rapidly. If you say, oh, this is, you know, and the longer you do it, the more adept you get at it, and the less frequent are your episodes, and the better you're able to do it. They're of shorter duration. But if you don't do it, then you're inviting all kinds of avoidance symptoms and problems, the addictions.
For sure.
Yeah.
I just want to say I need to bow out now. I'm really glad.
Yeah, me too.
Back. Thank you
Well-
so very much. I'll see you next week.
Okay,
next week.
bye-bye.
Yeah, I'll be heading off too. I made, let's see. Well, if Sherry and Bob are leaving, Candace and Charles, do you guys want to stay?
Well,
I
that's
can
it.
make you guys
You know, I think we've got a very good discussion. So, you know,
Right.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna make you co-host so that when I drop off and Bob and Sherry drop off, the meeting will still keep going on Zoom.
Okay, we can do it for a couple minutes.
Thanks, Caroline.
No
Of
problem.
course. Bye. Have a great
Thank you.
weekend.
Sorry, guys. I was muted. I